Hello and welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to be covering some points about the Resident Evil 2 remake and some of the things that we can definitely expect from the full game's release. These are based on educated guesses, they're mere speculation. I do want to say that before we get into things, but I'm going to be using the Resident Evil 1 remake as well as the Resident Evil 0 HD Remaster as the sources for my beliefs. So without any further delay, let's get into the list. Now the first thing I'm going to talk about is the camera angles, because this is a very controversial subject at the moment that has come up recently. Now there is some information that has been dumped recently, tweets from Hideki, that's the previous Resident Evil 2 director, among other hints that the camera view has changed to over the shoulder. I've covered these in my latest videos, so you can go check those out if you want the full story. But if the over the shoulder camera view is taken as the default camera view, I will say this: Capcom would be very wise to understand that the fixed camera angle is very nostalgic and important to many of the fan base. I've personally experienced and recognized how important this is, so having the option to toggle it on and off I think is something they should be paying attention to. The camera angles are going to be a very important part that affects every piece of the game, the way you perceive the entire environment, as well as the subtle mechanics such as aiming and evading around the zombies. The second point I'm going to get into is the dialogue. Now all of you must remember the dialogue in some of the early Resident Evil titles. It was absolutely horrendous. It was like something straight out of a B-grade action flick. There were so many cheesy lines. Now for most people this was actually a large part of the charm for the earlier games. They had some very serious plots. So Resident Evil 1 had Barry, for example, and he said some of the most cringiest lines in the original game. We all remember the Jill sandwich joke, but there are other lines as well.
What a mansion!
Now in the Resident Evil 1 remaster, the dialogue was completely rewritten. The same format and structure was used, but it was modernized. If you were a fan and played the originals, you would instantly recognize the differences in the line, but enough of it had remained to be a nostalgic callback to the original, and this was beautifully well done. This is something I expect in Remake 2 as well, for all of the dialogue to be completely modernized while staying true to the authentic nature of the original game. Now if Dust Golem's leaks are to be true and the scenario A and B have been scrapped, we can expect even more narrative changes as well, so I'm looking forward to how more fleshed out this is, because looking at Resident Evil 7 as well as looking at the evolution of Resident Evil overall, you can actually see the dialogue has made vast improvements. Now my next point is going to be about the environment. I think it's going to be redesigned and enhanced as well. Now the original Resident Evil 1 had a little bit of a different environment to the Resident Evil 1 remaster that was on GameCube. Not only were some of the more iconic areas such as the lobby enhanced and made much larger to give you more of that impact, the entire lighting was redone and made much more dreary to give a more tragic and devastating atmosphere. And I'm expecting this to be much more enhanced in Remake 2, considering the title alone. I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do with this, because Resident Evil 1 and 0 had some really good HD quality textures, and they made the entire environments just much more realistic, as well as 10,000 times more aesthetically pleasing and much more traumatic to actually take in. These games looked absolutely beautiful and stunning, and I will say the redesigns of the iconic areas is nothing but enthralling. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do with Remake 2, and especially some of the more iconic areas such as the Raccoon City Police Department. Of course, with the redesign of the entire areas that I'm speculating are going to happen, I do imagine that the cutscenes will also be enhanced, making them much more modernized, adding a new level of cinematography, and just really making it much more like a movie. Not only do I think the angles will change and such, I think the possibilities are that the cutscenes will be changed entirely or modified in heavy ways. Imagine it like the dialogue, where it's familiar to the original scene but with new additions to make it much more impactful. I can already imagine if there's a cutscene where, say, there's thousands of zombies on screen coming after Leon and you have to get away. Sound design is something that's probably going to be touched upon greatly. Not only is the entire OST going to be rewritten from scratch, I also think, of course, all the atmospheric gun sounds, environmental noises are going to be enhanced, and a lot more is going to be added. If you guys remember, actually the interiors of Resident Evil 2 were very much quiet. You couldn't really hear the outside of Raccoon City much, and when you did, it was the exception that kind of made you alert. However, it would be absolutely beautiful in a modern game to constantly hear atmospheric sounds such as police sirens, gunshots, people screaming, all those lovely noises that you would associate with a zombie apocalypse in a burning crucible of a city. The GameCube version of Remake 1 concludes with a completely different soundtrack to the original. Shinji Mikami at the time wanted to do this because he didn't feel like the original version had lived up to the production quality he wanted to put into the first iteration, modernizing it from the DualShock version into a whole new league of its own. I really do feel like the soundtrack of Remake 2 is going to be changed to this level, so this is something I feel a little bit mixed on. I know they're gonna probably change it up to something completely new, but I do hope with certain songs like Ada's theme, the one in the background here, they do remain faithful to the original. Now, considering there were changes to the inventory management as well as additional items in the remake to the original Resident Evil, I do believe it's also possible that Remake 2 might get the same fate. A lot of additional diverse weapons and tools to use that will change the way we can advance through the map, and maybe even allow us into areas and environments we wouldn't have access to otherwise. After Resident Evil 4, the series has started to really thrive off of its weapon diversity, and I do believe Resident Evil Remake 2 is a prime example of something that could really benefit from this. Seeing as we're in Raccoon City, they could up the number of the zombies as well as give us more lethal weapons to play with to compensate for that problem. Many of you may be familiar with the character Lisa Trevor. Now, she actually has a very horrific and sad story to tell. She's the daughter of the original architect that made the Spencer mansion. Now, after George Trevor had drew up the plans and the Spencer estate had been fully developed, Spencer became very cautious and decided to exterminate all of the family to ensure there were no leaks about the mansion's design or any of the malicious intent behind his plans. Lisa and her mother were invited to the mansion in advance and were promptly kidnapped and tested upon. Now, her mother showed no reactions to the virus, but Lisa showed all sorts of reactions and also overcame all of them, keeping most of her cognitive functions and sanity intact. The only thing keeping Lisa sane at this point was her mother's presence, and in return her mother hatched a plan to escape the facility and get out of the area with her daughter. However, she was killed in the process, and Lisa, in a rage, decided to kill everybody. She was further used and experimented upon until Umbrella thought they had killed her and dumped her in a nearby location. In Resident Evil 1, after figuring out a puzzle, we come upon the grave of Lisa's mother and Lisa appears in a rage. It goes on further than this, but all of this was missing from the original game. The entire subplot was added in the remake, but it was written on something that was cut out from the original game, another thing they wanted to put in to give Resident Evil 1 that true production value they'd always wanted. Now when you think about that story, just consider Resident Evil 2. There's all sorts of narrative changes they could make, subplots they could add, things that could enhance the lore and understanding we already have of the universe, and when it comes to several of the characters such as Leon, Claire and Ada, there's plenty of things to explore there. Especially at the end of the game, there could be all sorts of revelations, and I'm just really looking forward to seeing what they do in that department, because I'm sure they'll continue on with it. Anyway guys, these are some of the things that I think will definitely change based on the remake of Resident Evil 1 as well as the HD remaster of Resident Evil 0, because many of the changes listed in this video also happened in that game as well. I hope you've enjoyed the video as always guys. If you did, you can leave a like and a subscribe to support the channel and help us grow on our way to becoming the next PewDiePie, so I can just upload any kind of video I want, get 3 million views, create controversies, and do all of that good stuff. I hope you're having a beautiful day. As always, take it easy and peace.